Good afternoon, everybody. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ria Sa. I was honored to participate with David, Nick, and Terry to help organize this summit, and my role as an advisory board member for the Lane Center in the American West. In addition to being a Westerner by birth, the state of Colorado, my own career has primarily been focused on Western resources or public lands policy. And interestingly enough, I've been able to look at these issues from a couple of different vantage points, both in big private philanthropy, including the Hewlett and the Packard Foundations, but also in the federal government in two roles, one as an assistant secretary at the U.S. Department of Interior, and the other as a legislative assistant for a Western senator from Colorado. My current day job right now is the president of the Marin Community Foundation, and so I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to continue my association with the West, with the Lane Center, to both maintain and update my knowledge about the dynamism of the region we all call home. So I am here today to introduce our last keynote speaker. The Honorable Murray Rankin has truly led a remarkable career. A lawyer by training, Minister Rankin has served as both a full and an adjunct professor of law at the University of Victoria Law School, teaching environmental and administrative law. Throughout different stages of his career, he has been an active private solicitor on a number of cases and an active advisor on dozens more, many focused on complicated resource revenue sharing agreements, in addition to major treaty right negotiations for First Nations. His legal specialties include environment, Aboriginal, and public law. As a public official, Minister Rankin has held various positions in virtually all levels of the government. I think you're originally from Ottawa, and maybe you got your political career by volunteering as a youngster with the NDP, the New Democratic Party. But Minister Rankin first served as a Minister of Parliament representing Victoria, British Columbia, from 2012 to 2019. In that role, he was named as one of the hardest working members of Parliament by your colleagues, I might add. He served as NDP House Leader and had responsibility across a wide array of issues, including everything from national revenue and taxation issues, federal justice and attorney general issues, health and healthcare issues. In 2017, Minister Rankin was appointed to the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, and 2 years later, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau named Rankin to lead the newly created National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, which literally oversaw all national security and intelligence activities carried out by the Government of Canada. Minister Rankin stepped down from his federal roles to transition into leadership roles within the province of British Columbia. From 2020 to 2024, he was elected to serve as a member of the Legislative Assembly for the province of British Columbia, and in that role, continued to drive some of Canada's most ambitious policies on everything from economic equality, privacy and security issues, and environment and human health protections. While it is clearly hard, if not impossible, to try to pick only one notable element of Minister Rankin's obviously tremendous list of accomplishments, I do want to accentuate a particular post that he served when he was an MLA, when he was appointed as Minister for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. During this period of time, Minister Rankin developed the first plan in all of Canada, and I believe it may have been the first plan in all of the world to actually implement the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People into action. So let me just repeat that. I think Minister Rankin was responsible for actually implementing this very aspirational and very important declaration into actual process and regulation in a government. And this was for the British Columbian government, which continues, I believe, to be a leader, not just in Canada, but throughout the world in upholding and recognizing Native rights. Seeing this aspiration put into practice, I think has not just been a historic accomplishment, but as we heard from our previous panelists, it is actually the active way in which First Nations interact with their provincial governments today. And that framework has really redefined the relationship between First Nations and the government of Canada. And I think it's just important to really underscore that because we're obviously here in America, and in America we have a very different posture of relations between our Indigenous communities and our governments. And that's primarily because most of the Indigenous communities here in the United States were treated. Whether treated in war or treated in peace, they were treated. Well, in Canada, many, especially in the Western provinces, had not been treated. And so you have an opportunity, and a more modern opportunity, to really superimpose an evolution, I should like to say, of where we as people both want to respect, acknowledge, and interact with the Indigenous people that have lived in our continents for time immemorial. In addition to this great act of implementing UNDRIP into law, Minister Rankin was also responsible for giving formal rights and title to the Haida Nation and their land of Haida Gwaii, which many of you may know as Queen Charlotte's Island. Yet another historic first for any of you who are familiar at all with Indigenous law in Canada. Significant accomplishment for not just the Haida Nation, but for all Indigenous nations. So we are clearly very, very honored and thrilled to have such a distinguished closing speaker. He's not only going to, I think, be able to wrap up all of the pieces of substance that we were able to dive in today. I certainly hope you can also project those things onto how we navigate this really interesting moment we're in as longtime friends and potentially, hopefully, future friends moving forward. So interested in both your reflections on the discussions we've had today and in many ways your forecast of what's to come. So please join me in welcoming Minister Rankin.
Well, thank you very, very much. That was a very generous introduction. It's just an honor to be here at Stanford again. I had an opportunity to teach at the law school some years ago, but I haven't been back. And I just want to say how beautiful this part of the world is. Thanks to the Bill Lane Center for the opportunity to be here. I don't want to thank the organizers, though, for making me the very last speaker in the conference. And thank you for those who remained. There'll be a gold star at the end of this, and the exam will be really easy, don't worry. I used to teach at the University of Victoria for many years, and I salute the students that are here in particular for this. You know, I have to say, I had the opportunity to talk a few times with Rhea and with Dr. Kennedy, who's one of my academic heroes, and to be able to collaborate on a program like this with such an extraordinary scholar is just really, really an honor for me. I just want to say I was asked to do three things, and the order was talk about the Columbia River Treaty, talk about Indigenous relations, particularly as regards international issues, which I'm very interested in, but also talk about, as Rhea said, this moment in our shared history. How does it feel to be a Canadian right now? And I thought I'd start with that because, quite frankly, it colors everything I'm going to say. This is a very personal topic for me, and it's a very painful topic for me. I have had a long love affair with the United States. When I was in 4th grade, I sent penny postcards, some of you are old enough to remember them, to every single state to get information on them, tourist information. I visited perhaps 44, I tried to count them last night, states as well. I grew up in a border town, St. Catharines, Ontario, an automobile production town which is just being eviscerated by the tariffs and the economic uncertainty that is currently before us. My grandson is an American citizen. Both of my sons have graduate degrees from prestigious American universities. I lived in the Bay Area during the anti-war movement. I went to graduate school on the East Coast. It's a cliche to say it, but most of my best friends are American. Many of my best friends are American. But I have to say this is a very, very difficult time. My wife won't come to the United States anymore. Many of my friends are also boycotting the United States. People who have houses in Scottsdale or Palm Springs or Florida, you'll know their Canadians are leaving in droves. Ask any real estate agent what's going on right now. The Canadian Association of University Teachers has advised Canadian academics who have expressed negative views about the current administration to be, quote, particularly cautious about traveling to the United States, close quote. My bar association in British Columbia has issued a newsletter about precautions that lawyers are supposed to take when they cross the border. So we're living in fear. Canadians are living in fear. The tourism year to year to the United States is down 25%. Governor Newsom, as you know, has done a video saying, please come. Airlines are canceling flights to the United States significantly. And almost 25% of Americans in a recent poll state that Canada is the enemy. That's polling information. Senator Murkowski of Alaska said, quote, we are all afraid. But I think Canadians have more to fear than Republican senators do at the moment. So quite frankly, I feel like a kid whose parents are going through a divorce right now, and I'm particularly risk averse. And as I say, it's very, very difficult because I kind of love both my parents. But that's how insecure Canadians are feeling right now. So when your president suggested our country should become the 51st state and be annexed, he was serious. Our current prime minister has confirmed that. This was not a euphemism or it was something that was to be taken seriously, and we do take it seriously. But what he has done is happily created a national unity in our country that I haven't seen since our centennial year in 1967. Even Quebec separatists and Alberta separatists are now coming together in a way that I haven't seen again since then. Margaret Atwood is a Canadian writer, some of you know, and she wrote a book called Survival back in the 70s. And it talked about her book is called Survival because it talked about the Canadian expression of identity and its preoccupation with survival. Now with this existential threat that we feel, survival is very much on everybody's mind. But I want to say in a positive way, I really do think we can overcome this together, and I want to conclude with that, if I may. But quite frankly, it is a difficult time. Michael Ignatieff, who's an academic from Canada, wrote that, quote, we have had long since got used to American condescension and ignorance of our country, but now we are discovering that there's a lot worse. Betrayal of agreements signed and ratified by both countries, ripping up partnerships across the border that enriched both sides, and the most basic betrayal of all, the president questioning whether Canada should exist at all. That's a huge sense of betrayal. Our current Prime Minister, Carney, just recently, a few days ago, met with your president, and he said, he wants to break us so that America can own us. But I wouldn't take him as the ultimate authority. My hero is Neil Young of this state, who said, they want our resources, they want our land, they want our fisheries, they want our water, they want our Arctic, maybe they want our souls as well. Since the president was elected, though, we've had a new prime minister in Canada who was elected solely as a consequence of the United States. The biggest turnover in popular opinion in history was a party that was 25% behind 6 months ago and got almost a majority government in Parliament, unprecedented, solely because of fear and anxiety that we're feeling about the United States. And you may have seen last week, the Australian government also got re-elected, surprising every pollster because of the same reality. There's so much misinformation. as you know, as you heard, I've been very much involved in national security, national defense issues. And we were proud of the longest undefended border in the world. And yet, we have had to appoint somebody called a fentanyl czar. And Professor Timothy Snyder, then of Yale, now has moved to University of Toronto, the leading American scholar on fascism, has talked about what this nonsense of fentanyl from Canada has meant. The claim that it is pouring in through Mexico and Canada. Well, the amount of fentanyl that passes from Canada to the United States is about 0.2% of the total. That is not 2%, but 0.2% of 0.2%. The total amounts smuggled in last year would fit in one suitcase from Canada. It wasn't even mentioned in the official 2024 National Drug Threat Assessment of the Drug Enforcement Administration. So there's just so much misinformation. Tariffs are going to kill our economy. It's killing the town I grew up in already. Today we had an announcement that our unemployment rate's going up for the first time for a long while. And the implications of tariff, ask any economist in this room, are going to make things more expensive for Canadians, and particularly more expensive for Americans. And yet this is the world that we're moving to. Fun fact, the Boston Tea Party was a protest against tariffs. The United States will need us for their so-called Golden Dome air defense. And, remember that Chinese balloon that came in? You need us for radar detection as well. And I guess the point is we have to get along just for security purposes. Representative Adam Smith of Washington State was a ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, and he said, quote, "If we continue to treat Canada as a hostile nation, if we continue to talk about annexing them, basically violating their sovereignty, what is Canada going to do? Are they going to maintain that partnership?" Close quote. I think there's a significant amount to fear as a result, and much more to be gained by collaboration. So that's my introduction on sort of the state of play. I wanted to get that off my chest before I can talk about perhaps some of the more specific items that we've talked about so I think effectively today. I want to start with the Columbia River Treaty, but I think I've been basically scooped by most of the people who are here. But I want to start by talking about the president of your country musing about what he called, quote, "a very large faucet that could be turned on in Canada to bring water to the United States, particularly the Southwest." There is no faucet. The Columbia River ends well over 1,000 kilometers from Los Angeles, for example. And if you envisaged some sort of future where the Columbia River fed parched areas of the Southwest, it would take a Herculean effort to build infrastructure to get the water from the northern U.S. to the south. Some of you will have heard about something called NWAPA. Have you heard that word, NWAPA? Some of you are nodding. I had to remember what it stood for. It's the North American Water and Power Alliance, tabled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the 1950s. It's a zombie project that keeps coming back. In case you haven't heard of it, particularly the younger people in the audience, this was an $80 billion plan that proposed construction of, are you ready, 369 structures that would divert water from the north, the Yukon, Liard, the Peace Rivers, through the Rocky Mountain Trench to connect Alaska to the Mississippi and Colorado River basins, Alberta to the Great Lakes. And, it kind of made sense at one level. American writer Mark Reisner wrote Cadillac Desert and said it would require 6 nuclear power plants worth of energy to pump the required volume of water across the Rockies. It sounds like science fiction. Maybe it is, but that would be the faucet of all faucets if it were ever to be created. So from the Columbia River point of view, our perspective is the faucet is largely already open. It fills reservoirs south of the border for irrigation and hydroelectricity. And I understand that although there are no technical meetings going on now under the existing treaty, there are many things that have to be done vis-a-vis the flood management agreement, which I'll come to in a moment. So we had an agreement of principle, you've heard about it, some 10 months ago, reached in July of last year. Almost a decade of engagement with British Columbia, Indigenous nations, local governments, residents, and it's a clear roadmap that I think has a lot of positive features that you've heard about today. We're anxious to preserve the principles of the agreement in principle. Canada has a five-government approach. We have Canada, federal government, British Columbia, and First Nations, and I truly believe that we should be proud of the model that has come through, because we have an Indigenous stewardship lens to the negotiations. We've managed to get consensus on our Canadian team. Canada and the federal and the British Columbia don't always agree on things. 3 First Nations have been central to our team: the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Secwepemc nations are part of our team, integral part of the team, shaping Canada's priorities and objectives and negotiating positions. I don't think the American tribes have been to the same extent engaged. They are called expert advisors, I believe, and I think there's a fear, perhaps you can correct me, that if they were to open up the American team more broadly to involve the states, that's something that perhaps the federal government has been unwilling to do. So perhaps there's there's a more attenuated voice on of Indigenous people on the American side. I'd like to hear more about that in discussions. That is what might be the case. So British Columbia is honoring the treaty. It only expires if one of the parties gives 10 years notice, so it's going to continue. We fear unilateral actions, however, from the United States. If they were to renounce the treaty and stop paying Canada, for example, under the treaty, that would certainly be a bad signal to American allies and other trading arrangements, trading agreements, and other international commitments. It was, I think, John O'Riordan who talked about the fact that we have a rather robust revenue sharing agreement that's come out from for the Canadian First Nations. Each of them get 5% of what was about $435 million last year. This is to be negotiated again in March of next year, and those negotiations within Canada are currently underway. The First Nations seek a long-term revenue sharing agreement, and there's been a pilot model of governance which includes more Indigenous cultural values and ecosystem focus that will be negotiated further. We've talked a little bit about the American position. I want to particularly talk, if I may, about the Colville Confederated Tribes. It's a rather difficult situation. Cody Desautels was present on the American side, I understand, and was a strong voice for salmon. And I just want to salute Mr. Michel, who's here, for his contribution to fish. It's been quite extraordinary. There he is, I can see you over there. I want to just acknowledge your extraordinary work. I've had a lot to do with the Desautels case when I was in private practice and then when I became a minister. Some of you know that the Colville Confederated Tribes were successful in our Supreme Court of Canada, arguing that they are an Aboriginal people of Canada. Extraordinary, really. They live in particularly now in the United States, in Washington State. But they were declared extinct in 1946 in Canada. The Arrow Lakes area, 80% of their territory was flooded when the dam came forward. They were declared extinct. They lost their territory. Somebody shot an elk in Canada, in the Nelson area a few years back. They argued, hey, we have an Aboriginal right to hunt in Canada. They went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada and were found to be an Aboriginal people of Canada, which is an extraordinary thing, never happened before. And now we're trying to figure out the implications of that. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I want to say that Okanagan sockeye is not listed under the as I understand it, under the endangered species in the United States, but it has been a really endangered fish. And thanks to cross-border work between our Okanagan Silk people and the Colville Confederated Tribe, the Sinike, we have managed to go from a few thousand fish to perhaps 300 to 500,000 fish. And that's just an extraordinary example of what I call hands across the border by Indigenous people. And having such a star here, I just want to acknowledge your work on such a thing. But Canada wants to go further, as you've heard. We want to ensure that we can have some more water under the arrangements that are being that were to be part of the renewed treaty. It's still being under consideration. I still hope we'll get there. To have more water for 4.5 million acre feet to stay in Canada rather than simply going to the States in order to bring back the wetlands, the habitat restoration that you heard about for cultural purposes, socioeconomic, fish restoration, and keeping the waters cooler, as we heard earlier in the presentation. So I just hope that we can still move forward. I hope the treaty is ultimately successful so we can do more in that regard. Also, I know that there's great concern in the United States about reintroduction of salmon, say at the Roosevelt Dam. Very costly, very technically difficult. I'm really excited, though, in the potential treaty, I'll call it that, the creation of something called the Joint Environmental Board. I don't think we heard about the JEB under this proposed treaty. It's the Joint Ecosystem and Indigenous and Tribal Cultural Values Body, JEB, quite a mouthful. 50% of it is Canadian Indigenous people, 50% American, and they are to make recommendations on what they call a one-river approach. I think that's extraordinarily, the potential is extraordinary for that. So right now we're in a bit of limbo. We have this flood management agreement that has to be renegotiated by 2027. The interim agreement I think it's fair to say that United States gets what it wants for now. It gets restrictions in what they have to pay for power benefits. They get assured flood control benefits. The Canadian benefits will come later, we hope, if the treaty is negotiated, finalized. More flexibility, more payments, and so forth. So we have a lot to hope for in a new treaty, and I fervently hope that the great work that went into it, reflected in the agreement in principle, will yield those benefits. I promised to talk a little bit more specifically about cross-border Indigenous issues, and I'll focus a little bit on the Colville Confederated Tribes. But let me just say that we have significant differences between the legal regimes in the United States and in Canada. There's a Professor Elizabeth Hidalgo Reese is at Stanford Law School. I don't know if she's in the room, but she's written about tribal law as the law of conquest in her mind. She unlike in the United States, Canada has, as was alluded to, Aboriginal and treaty rights guaranteed in our Constitution. I don't think that specifically got mentioned. In 1982, we completely reformed the Constitution of Canada, and as of 1985, a section called Section 35 came in, which has changed our country forever. It simply says this: Aboriginal and treaty rights are hereby confirmed for Aboriginal people, defined as First Nations people, Métis, and Inuit in our north. Aboriginal and treaty rights are hereby confirmed. We thought, well, that's no big deal. What it did was revolutionize land management, and you heard Chief Epp talk about that very well earlier today. And First Nations have Aboriginal and treaty rights, including title, if they can demonstrate it in a court of law or negotiate it, as we've done in the Haida case that was described, outside of what you call reservations. So tribal sovereignty, as I understand it in the United States, is limited to the reservation area, although management beyond that, of course, on fisheries and other resources, thanks to the Bolt decision. But in Canada, we have this evolving tapestry of Aboriginal rights and title. Combined with our desire for reconciliation, we had like in South Africa, a commission called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and extraordinary piece of work that has really changed things forever. Coupled with our recognition, as was described in law, of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, an aspirational document which is now our law. And some say, well, you know, that's not going to be litigated in court. It's not going to be a justiciable document. Well, I assure you, it is certainly the marching orders of politicians at both the federal and British Columbia level. So what does that mean? Well, we have an action plan. In my case, 84 very concrete, specific things that every ministry, you call them departments in government, must do. From education to sports to tourism to finance, every single department has a piece of the action. That action plan was co-developed with Indigenous leadership. And every year, it's like going to the dentist. You have an annual report, and your department has done well, and you've done badly, and it's all there for the public to see. So it's genuine transparency and accountability. And believe me, you don't want to be the department that gets an F grade for how you're doing. So there's a real significant commitment, I believe, to reconciliation. That's reflected in our environmental assessment legislation, and Chief Epp made this point. Because of free, prior, and informed consent, which is a concept under the Declaration Act, we have a consensus-seeking requirement on the environmental assessment of reviewable projects, large projects. It's not always going to be successful, but there's a genuine legally required requirement that we seek that consensus in a meaningful way. What does that mean? At the end of the process, we now have a dispute resolution requirement, facilitation, in an effort to see if we can bring the people finally together with First Nations consent. So one of the interesting things that I wanted to talk about was the cross-border nature of that, because that's, I think, the topic I wanted to be, before we get to question and answer, to focus on. We have what are called participating Indigenous nations in Canada that have a right to be involved, as I've described. But what if you're the Lummi or the Makah, or you are a nation like in Alaska that claims that they have Aboriginal rights in Canada? The borders never existed back in the day, right? So what are your rights in projects that might affect you? Example, a mine in northern British Columbia where the Taku River might go into Alaska. What does it mean to the Lummi who might want to challenge the Roberts Bank port expansion near Vancouver, who say, hey, we fish there, our rights are affected? How do you handle that? Canada's trying to grapple with that. And so far, we take the view that participating Indigenous nations with the full panoply of rights I've described are limited to those resident in Canada. However, we recognize that we need to do more. There's lawsuits that are going on in vis-a-vis the United States. But that lets me end with what I wanted to talk about on this side, which is the Colville Confederated Tribes, the Sinique people. They have been found to be an Aboriginal people of Canada. We cannot, I argue, treat them like we would treat the Lummi, who haven't had such a declaration, or Alaskan First Nations or Indigenous people. We must find a way to address the fact that they have rights in Canada. Now, I don't mind telling you, and Canadians that are here in the audience will know, that many of our First Nations in Canada are not exactly happy to have a nation from the United States, a First Nation or I guess tribe, coming into our country. But that is the reality, I argue, that the Supreme Court of Canada has visited upon us, and we need to find a better way to ensure that, for example, if there's an environmental assessment of a project in Canada that affects, let's say, the Arrow Lakes region in Canada, it won't just be those nations in that area, but also the Colville Confederated Tribes that I argue now have that kind of right. So we have to find a way, I say, to deal with in Canadian located First Nations, separate category of those who are outside of Canada but have concerns about projects in Canada, and finally a specific and certainly distinct category for the Colville Confederated Tribes. So I just want to, if I may, because I want to have time for conversation at the end of this day, where you've been such a patient audience. I want to conclude where I started. I was happy to read last night that your president told NBC News that it is, quote, highly unlikely that he would use military force to take Canada. He hasn't ruled this out for Greenland, but I'm happy to hear that we're not going to face imminent invasion. In my opinion, the solution to all of this is not to sever ties with the United States. That's crazy given our proximity and our interrelated economies. We have to rebuild relationships among people. But Americans have to understand that it is unthinkable for us to be a 51st state. Even if the government of the United States uses its economic power to bully us and to succeed in destroying our economy, doing a pretty good job of getting there right there now, we will never surrender our sovereignty to the United States. We would fight that. Many Americans say Canadians are just the same as Americans. But what would your president do with the 6 million people in the province of Quebec, some of whom only speak French? He just said last week that the United States is a nation with one language, English. How would he handle that? What would he do with our constitutionally protected rights of Indigenous people that is, as I said earlier, changed so much of our legal landscape? How would he deal with that? What about our commitment to Medicare, which is like 90% popular in our country? Would he eradicate that? What about our concern for anti-gun legislation? What would you do about that? So we think that these things are worth fighting for. It's, however, beginning to feel a lot like the 1970s in Canada right now. So many Americans are coming up. I just helped a family who moved from Seattle. One's a doctor, one's an administrative law judge, to relocate for essentially political refugees, to put a fine point on it. Dr. Snyder from Yale is now teaching at the University of Toronto. We're really happy that that's the case. We're having many people. We're poaching doctors, other professionals, people who believe in science, who are coming to our country as well. My point is we're in a particularly difficult spot, and I don't think there's any reason to deny it. But I'm an eternal optimist. I think we'll weather this storm together. It's true, Canada has to spend more money on military. And there's things we need to fix. But as our ambassador to the United States, her name is Kirsten Hillman, said recently, everyone's going to soon feel the effects of these tariffs. And it will be political pressure, she says, economic pressure, consumer and voter pressure on both sides of the border that may change things. A couple weeks ago, I live on Vancouver Island. Some of you may have heard of a town called Nanaimo. It's a little tiny town. And some guy went on social media, TikTok, of course, and he said, come on up to Canada, why don't you come and visit us? Because we need to have, a better relationship with Americans. Several thousand people responded, and last week there was a festival welcoming about several hundred American visitors who just on the spur of the moment came up to, of all places, Nanaimo to visit. My point is simply that it's going to be people-to-people relationships that I think will help us get over this difficult patch that we're in now. I think we really need to nurture friendships. We need to continue to be good neighbors. And I honestly believe that goodwill can restore one of the best relationships on the planet, which we've had to date between our two countries. Let's do it, it's not too late. Thank you. Dr. Kennedy asked me if I would moderate the questions, and I'm very happy to do that. And I see we have some time if you would like to ask any questions within the realm of defamation and other national security constraints. More than happy to take just about anything. Yes, right at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your remarks, and I want to assure you, as an American, that's at least I'll speak for myself. I've been appalled, horrified, deeply grieved by these words that have also grieved you and other Canadians. It's a very difficult time. I really appreciated your remarks today. My question: we didn't talk about land back today. It didn't come up in your remarks. I'm a reporter. I've been covering a lot of these actions in British Columbia, most recently the Nuu-chah-nulth Nation of Nuu-chah-nulth. They've been working to try to get back land that, they didn't fight a war, they didn't sign a treaty. It's like, beat it, you're bugging me. What are you doing here? We want our land back so that they can assert control over their land, especially with regard to industrial forestry and to try to restore their salmon runs. So I just would love to hear some thoughts from you about land back. It's growing in BC. We're seeing more and more of these sorts of actions. It's a little different for us down here. We do have treaties, some of the tribes anyway. And so this whole idea of really large-scale economic enterprises that are going on unceded territory, full-on unceded, and then these nations coming forward to say, actually, we're not okay with that anymore. It's a very interesting time. I'd just love to hear your thoughts about where this is headed.
Thanks so much for the question. It's fabulous that you know about Nuu-chah-nulth. I bet not many people here do. There's a tiny little First Nation, one of the Nuu-chah-nulth, just like our friends from Macau, one of the Vancouver Island, used to be called Nootka, now Nuu-chah-nulth people, brought a case for Aboriginal title in the Supreme Court, and it was in part to deal with, I think, a reaction to industrial logging. The case went to court, and they argued for a huge territory. The court found that they should get a smaller territory. I won't bore you. It's on the appeal to the Court of Appeal, and who knows what will ultimately happen. When I was minister, one of the things that I was very proud of, and Ria alluded to it, was we recognized that in certain parts of British Columbia where there have been no treaties, there are Aboriginal title. There is Aboriginal title that First Nations have. What does Aboriginal title mean? Well, it essentially means fee simple plus. It usually includes mineral rights. It usually includes the kind of ownership. There's differences the courts have found. For example, it can't be alienated in the same way that you and I could sell our house to someone else. But the rights that go with it, the inescapable economic component, to use the court's words, live and well. So we did something that I'm very proud of in Haida Gwaii. We said, we don't need to go to court to be told the Haida have lived there forever. We don't need to be told that they're the only people there, that there's no conflicting, overlapping claims from other nations. Just look at an atlas. Just look at your history. Haida have always lived there. So we said, we don't need to spend $50 million to be told by the Supreme Court of Canada that, guess what, they have Aboriginal title there. So we settled a lawsuit, and we now recognized for the first time, federally and provincially, that they have Aboriginal title to Haida Gwaii. Nuu-chah-nulth didn't make that case. They went straight to court. We could have negotiated. We might well have negotiated. We might still negotiate. Other nations First Nations are seeking a negotiated remedy. The problem is we don't have treaties in many cases, and there is enormous overlap. You say you have that valley, you say you have the same value. 3 First Nations might claim it. So that makes it practically very difficult. But it's not impossible, and other nations are currently seeking to negotiate. We do have some treaties. We have been remiss. We have friendship treaties on Vancouver Island called Douglas Treaties. And in the northeast of our province, where all of the oil and gas is, that's an historic treaty from 1900 called Treaty 8. Most of Canada has treaties. It's just British Columbia, we didn't get around to it, and we're now dealing with the consequences. Yes?
Hi, thank you. I'd like to share an idea for a context that I think exists and ask if you agree, and then if you agree, what do you think we should do about it? So Trump, right, I don't think he operates in philosophical frameworks that we think are normal, right? Are things right or wrong? Are they legal? I think he operates from the context of getting more powerful, getting more protected, getting richer, exacting vengeance on his enemies. And so the question is, would you agree that context exists? And if so, how do you think we should work to get things to work for all of us?
Well, if I had an answer to that, I would be definitely a diplomat, and I'm not. Well, first of all, you're right. I was going to mention that the CEO of our largest bank, the Royal Bank of Canada, in an interview said Canadians shouldn't lose sight of the fact that Mr. Trump's actions contravene the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement that he negotiated. Here's what Mr. McKay said. It's important to remind people that what he's doing is illegal. He's trying to supersede this agreement by arguing his tariffs are for national security interests, think fentanyl. And that could be challenged in court by Americans, he said. Now, the point I'm making is there's a lot of misinformation, but there's also some actions that are arguably illegal. So maybe the courts in any other time and place might have been able to provide some constraints. Now, whether or not the courts here are still interested in providing the checks and balances that I used to be taught about, I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. But if it's illegality, lawyers will say there's got to be a remedy. But if the decision makers in the courts are not prepared to step up, then that could be of no consequence. There's international instruments as well, but does the United States accede to the jurisdiction of those international bodies? I don't know. Yes.
Thank you for summarized in a beautiful way what every Canadian, I think, is thinking right now, and you captured it beautifully. Oh, you summarized in a good and solid way what every Canadian is thinking right now, and you did it very well. Focusing back on the Columbia for a moment, in your remarks, you talked a little bit about the interim arrangements, and you noted that the United States had essentially got everything that it had asked for, and that all the Canadian stuff was still to come in this not yet disclosed agreement in principle. And Nigel Banks, our friend and colleague from the University of Calgary Law School, also pointed that out in a very well-written article, that the U.S. got everything it wanted, seemingly, and Canada is still waiting to get their side of what was talking to. How do you feel about that, and where do you see that going? Some of us are a little discouraged by that situation and can't see what's in it. It's kind of like Ukraine, where you go into the agreement and say, okay, you get Crimea, you get the Donbass, we won't join NATO, and now we want to negotiate. So that's maybe a little harsh of an analogy, but I think it might be accurate.
Well, thank you. And Richard, thank you very much for the question. I'm disappointed. I think we all are. We're going to continue to comply with the treaty until it goes on forever. There's a 10-year, notification clause, and people can walk away from it. But I really do think that it was a very good job. I think John O'Riordan has spoken about this in rebalancing the interests. The actual long-term agreement, the AIP the agreement in principle that was reached, is great. But it didn't go, so we had to it didn't go forward, so we have this 3-year hiatus. I just hope in those 3 years that we can figure out, if we can get back some of the very important things that we went to negotiate. We want more water for fish in Canada to do the habitat restoration. First Nations want to help us and help the whole ecosystem to have to better management for fisheries and Indigenous cultural values and so forth. A lot of what Canada wants will take time, will be over after the actual agreement is in place. I'm disappointed. I think most Canadians are disappointed. We thought that agreement was a very fair compromise that we achieved. And so I'm just hoping that with perhaps a new administration that cares about climate change, that may care about fish, that might care about Indigenous sovereignty issues, might be prepared to finalize it. Because if the AIP isn't going to be the document we work together on, are we going back to square one after all this time? That would be so sad. And we haven't got time. I think John O'Riordan has very fairly summarized the crisis that we're facing on climate change, if nothing else. And we have a way to move forward together. We did that in '64 when we did the Columbia River Treaty in the first place. I'm very proud of that agreement. You know, it's worked well for both nations. We got, of course, Indigenous people's interests it was all about hydro, it was all about flood control. But now we have the ability to try to put all of that together. Why would we throw away that opportunity? So I want to be optimistic. I want to be hopeful that we can, in fact, get back on track. I believe that's the end. So I want to say thank you very much.
Well, Minister Rankin, I want to say special thanks to you for a really extraordinarily clear and candid presentation. So thank you. And I want to thank in particular as well all the Canadians who are here. And I think I speak for everyone in this room that we are very happy to see you, and you're always welcome on this campus, and I dare say, in our country. A few last thank yous. I'm aware of the fact that I'm standing between all of you and dinner, so I'll be very brief, but I want to acknowledge the leadership here at CEPR, Greg Roston and Neil Mahoney for being our hosts, and Preeti Haymeyer, also from CEPR, for helping to make this occasion. And Lindsay and Kim and Sherry, also from CEPR, who just made the day go so smoothly. I want to thank Condi Rice, who got us started this morning, and Governor Inslee, who gave us our original keynote, and my colleagues from the Hoover Institution, Nick Parker and Terry Anderson, for being such wonderful colleagues and partners in this enterprise, and also from Hoover, Pam Luna and Yumi Higa. And of course, the staff and people at the Lane Center, especially Kate Gibson and Tina Lathia, and Buzz Thompson, and Rhea Saw, who's on the Lane Center Advisory Council and always puts her oar in deep for us, and much appreciated. And thanks to all of you for your interest in this topic, for your commitment to the health and well-being of the greater North American West, and your support for all we're doing here at Stanford to understand the region as best we can. Thanks again.